everyone and welcome back to Elle the Law Student. So if you don't follow me on social media you might not know, but I've had tonsillitis for a couple of weeks and so that's why there haven't been any videos for the past 2 Sundays, but I'm back now and I do feel much better, but if my voice goes dodgy at any point that's why. For those of you who don't know, I'm now a second year law student at Worcester College, University of Oxford. Now that means that I did my interviews in December 2017, and I got my offer in January 2018 and I started October 2018. Although my memory is probably not the best, I'm going to give it my best shot because I get asked questions about interviews a whole lot. So recently some of you might have submitted your Oxford applications and you may have found out by now if you have an interview. I'm not quite sure when you're informed, but if so, I know that that can be a really exciting but also quite scary time, and I really didn't know what to expect from my interview. So today I thought I would sit down and basically run through what happened at my interview. Quick thing just before I start, everybody's interview is different, depends on your tutor, your college, your subject, everything. I don't think there's a typical interview experience, but I'm just going to share my experience and some tips that helped me to get through it. So my interview was middle of December. I was told to arrive on the Wednesday and was told that I would be staying over Wednesday night. What most people did was they had 2 interviews. They had one interview on the Wednesday and one interview on the Thursday. However, because my surname begins with a B, I was kind of first on the list because it was alphabetical order, and then first to go on the list on the other way around, if that makes sense. Basically, I had 2 interviews in one day. I don't know why I'm taking so long to talk about this. I was told to arrive on the Wednesday by 9 AM. A lot of people actually stayed the night before their interview. You can do that and they do provide accommodation for you to do that, but I decided that I would prefer to sleep in my own bed the night before and go down the morning of. That did mean a very early start. I think we set off at about 5 AM. However, I wouldn't have changed that decision. So I arrived and on the wall there were all of the interview times, and I realised that my interview was in like 15 minutes time, which was, yeah, pretty scary, but also gave me it meant that I didn't have too much time to panic about it. I went to the Potter's Lodge and they gave me a room key. I had to then find my room, so I was staying in a room kind of on the far side of college, one of the more modern buildings, and I had an ensuite. It was quite a nice room. I then dropped my stuff off and we were told that we had to first go to lecture room B, which is it's a relatively small room, and we were given a passage to look at prior to the interview itself. So for me that was a piece of legislation. I can't remember if it was a piece of legislation and then also kind of a scenario, or if it was just the legislation, but I think it might have been legislation and the scenario, potentially. I think I had maybe 10 minutes to look at it. So I looked through it, highlighted everything that I thought was important, just made a couple of annotations, and then I was told when it was time to go to my interview. However, what I did realise about 1 minute before the end of my time was that there were actually 2 sides to this piece of paper, and I'd only seen the text that was on one side of the piece of paper, and then basically as soon as I realised this I was told that it was time for my interview. So I was like, oh dear, I've not even had my interview yet and I've already completely screwed this up. So I went into my interview thinking, oh dear Lord, I don't know what I'm doing. I think the things that people don't tell you about interviews is that it really is just quite an informal setting, or at least it was for me. It's just a chat. It's not a grilling. It's not like a job interview. This is the tutor's opportunity to see whether they want to be your tutor for the next 3 or 4 years, and also to see whether the Oxford teaching style would work for you, and they just want to get the best out of you. At least that's kind of how I understood the whole situation. I sat down in my first interview, and there were two men interviewing me, one of whom was one of my tutors last year. The other one, I don't know if I've met them since. There's a very good chance that I have, but just didn't recognise them. Sat down in the tutor's office, just generally asked me some questions about the statute that I've been given, and also kind of gave me some different scenarios to see how I would apply it. They would then kind of slightly change facts to see if my opinion would change, and that lasted for half an hour, I would say. I was roughly half an hour. I then had quite a while before my next interview. My next interview wasn't until 7 p.m, I don't think, something like that. It was late. So I went back to my room. I remember actually on that day I got my offer for Durham, and that gave me such a massive boost. Then for the rest of the day I kind of went and got some lunch. All of your meals are provided when you're at interview, so we just ate in the canteen. What else did we do? I can't remember. I think I just took the time to explore Worcester and Oxford and that kind of thing, because I hadn't spent any time on my own just looking around, and I felt like that was something I really wanted to do. Then it got to 7 o'clock and I went to my other interview. So in this interview I went in and sat down, and there were two tutors there. This was the only time that we really spoke about anything non-academic or like non-problem question related. I sat down and they asked me if I couldn't study law, then what would I study? And I said history, kind of went on to explain that. I think that's about it. They asked me what I studied at A-level and that kind of thing, but other than that I can't really remember. It wasn't a long discussion, it was more of an icebreaker. Then I was given an extract, this time in the interview, and this time it was Roman law. Sorry, I should have said the previous statute that I was looking at was criminal law. This these extracts were from Roman law. I was then given different scenarios to try and apply these extracts to, and then we kind of had a discussion about causation and liability and that sort of thing, but you didn't need to know anything legal at all. It was just about how do you think. So then I knew I didn't have any interviews on the Thursday. However, I did have to stay overnight, and I had to stay all of Thursday, because then I think it's supposed to be at about 7 o'clock that they put up if anybody needs to stay for an extra night to have an interview on Friday, because you might be interviewed at a different college. That doesn't mean anything in particular. That can be because another college might want to have you just kind of quality control, or yeah, it can literally mean anything. So if you are interviewed at another college as well, don't think into it at all. We were waiting and waiting, and we kept going to check this notice board, and it was like an hour, 2 hours later than it was supposed to be that there was a sign up that said all law candidates can go home. I think it was 8, and it's in December, so by this point it was dark and it was snowing as well. I remember it was snowing. The porters just said to us, look, you've got your rooms for another night anyway. They said that they would feel more comfortable if we stayed, just because they didn't really want us to be walking to the train station when it was cold and dark and everything. I think that really demonstrated to me what it was like to be a student at Worcester, that kind of real sense of community and the idea that everybody looks out for each other. But other than that, the Thursday was actually really brilliant, because I just went shopping. So there's a big shopping centre in Oxford called Westgate Shopping Centre. It's not been open too long, maybe 3 years, and just kind of went shopping around there, had an explore of Oxford in general, and it was, yeah, it was really lovely, really lovely. Then on Friday I went home. My dad was working in Coventry, I think, and so he was already relatively close, and so all he did was on his way back home basically came to Oxford and picked me up. But I didn't really have any time in Oxford on that Friday, because as I said, all of my interviews were on the Wednesday. So although I had to stay kind of technically 3 days for my interviews, I only had 1 day's worth of interview, which is quite unusual. Next up, just some brief tips. So the first one I would say is just be yourself. And that sounds really cheesy. I found that being myself kind of made me feel more comfortable, because I didn't feel like I was putting on anything, and realistically you don't want something else to be worrying about. Potentially I acted with more confidence than I normally would, but I think that's true in any interview situation. I would also really take the opportunity to get to know the other candidates. I found that everybody was super supportive. I didn't have any bad experiences with other candidates. In fact, everybody was just so lovely. And in fact, one of the people that I'm living with this year I actually met interview. So yeah, try to enjoy yourself, because at the end of the day this is an experience. You've got free accommodation in a different city, and try and make the most of it, even though I understand that you will be pretty nervous. The next thing for a practical point of view is to know your personal statement. So I wasn't asked any questions about my personal statement, however I know that people in other subjects sometimes are, or even in law just at other colleges. I've heard stories of generally tutors trying to break the ice by asking a question about somebody's personal statement, you know, like, oh, how did you find this book that you read, that sort of thing, and then the student just kind of goes completely blank. They've clearly not read the book, and yeah, enough said. Know your personal statement. The main thing that I found very helpful was somebody told me to think out loud. Practicing just running through your thought process. For example, if you're sat in silence staring at this piece of text that you've been asked to analyse or whatever, then the tutor doesn't know how your brain's working. They don't know if you're understanding things, they don't know what you're stuck on, they don't know any of these things. And so I kind of got used to the idea of thinking out loud and just mentioning, oh, well, I'm not sure because of X, or I think it could be this, or this would change my mind because... And as well, and this is so important, please do not feel like you can't ask for help. I did this, I can't even remember how many times, but I did it. I remember being stuck on there was the meaning of, I knew the meaning of a word in this criminal law statute, however, in the context it didn't make sense, which is quite common in law, and sometimes you get some rather interesting texts. However, all that I did was say, I think it's this, but I'm not really sure because I don't understand what this word means in the context. From that moment on, I thought the interview went so much better because I'd admitted that I didn't know something. I asked for help and I was given that help. They told me what it meant, and from there, everything kind of flowed really nicely. So don't feel like you can't ask for help. It's not a test as such, I don't think. Yeah, it's more of just a conversation. Honestly, just treat it like a conversation. I hope that was helpful. My memory is pretty rusty, however, I think the main things to take away from that are, it's just a conversation, try to enjoy yourself and think out loud, and like to the extent that you do admit where you don't understand something. Hopefully there'll be more consistent videos up from now on. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you soon. Bye.